Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week I sit down and talk about a Disney Plus offering of my own or a guest's choosing. This show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. So if you like what you hear and you can support us over there, we would definitely appreciate it. But if you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome, and of course, we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast with your friends. It's another solo show this week. It's been a busy couple of weeks here at That Nerdy Site. I kind of went into, on this Monday's episode, an update on kind of the current landscape of the site, as well as potential futures of the site. But basically the long and short of it is, in this past week we had a few team members decide they're going to be stepping away from the site. In Ben Bellevue, Chloe Naylor, and Christian Puente are all going to be kind of stepping aside and doing their own thing. So it's been a whole kind of tumultuous time for the site, and just didn't really kind of have the wherewithal to try and bring somebody together and sit in and do another kind of two-person or more episode this week. So I'm sitting down solo again this week, just like last week, to sit down with the part 3 of Disney Gallery, the Mandalorian series. The last couple episodes we're going to be talking about today are built around the score and connections. If you've been following along, we did back on episode 20 of That D Plus Show. Cam and I sat down and talked about the first few episodes on directing, legacy, and cast. And then last week, I sat down for another solo episode and did a part 2 episode on the series for technology, practical, and process. And so today I'm kind of rounding out this series of 8 episodes here. Again, I picked this one in part because I've really been enjoying the series. I've been enjoying kind of the behind-the-scenes look at The Mandalorian, but also because it was something I could easily kind of sit down and knock out as a solo thing. A little bit of history lesson, as previously discussed on these episodes, was originally released back on basically May the 4th. May the 4th be with you day, May 4th, 2020, alongside other releases like Prop Culture on Disney+. The runtime is approximately 30 minutes per episode, and it is now out and done. It was, I believe these episodes released kind of on a weekly basis, but all 8 episodes are out now and available for you on Disney+. As far as the who's who here, you have the director, Brad Barra, who's worked on previous things like a lot of the kind of Marvel documentaries, like Assembling a Universe and Expanding the Universe. And then he'd also done some of the filmic one-shots for Marvel, like Item 47 and the Agent Carter one-shot back before Agent Carter was expanded into its own full series. You have kind of the starring of these couple episodes. The first episode, talking about the score, is very much centered around, it kind of breaks the format of everything else we've seen so far, in that it's not like a round table with 5 or 6 people sitting there discussing the show. This episode is very much Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, and Ludwig Göransson, the composer for the series. So that was kind of episode 7 was really centered around the 3 of them. And then in episode 8, you get back to when discussing kind of the connections to the larger Star Wars universe. You have kind of a lot of the familiar faces we've seen throughout the series. You have Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni kind of there spearheading all the conversations, but you also have Deborah Chow, Rick Famuyiwa, which I finally figured out how to say his name. At least that's how Jon Favreau says it in this episode. Bryce Dallas Howard and Taika Waititi kind of all being the directors of season 1, and then you also have kind of some of the animation crew behind it. So you had Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni sitting down with Kathleen Kennedy as the kind of executive producer, but also Richard Bluff, John Knoll, and Hal Hickel, all playing their roles as visual effects people, ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, and animation directors. So that's kind of who's who in this one. In terms of how does this hold up, I think, again, just like with the previous episodes, it's a kind of documentary of the series they made to launch Disney+. So it's all relatively modern and holds up very well. And I really enjoyed kind of the deep dive they do into a lot of the conversations here, that we've heard little tidbits of as kind of certain stories, broke into the mainstream. Like last week I talked about the Werner Herzog story about Baby Yoda and or the child and kind of his reaction to that on set that they dove more into in last week's trio of episodes, and this is very similar. You have a lot of cool stories in here about talking about Jon Favreau really wanting to take the misfits of this universe and really kind of bring them to the forefront. Or I love the analogy that Dave Filoni makes of they describe it as it's like our brother took all the good toys that everybody wanted and we were just left with the scraps and made our own story based off of those characters. So a lot of cool stuff in this pair of episodes. Talking through the score episode first, as somebody who has been a fan of Ludwig Göransson back since the days when he was doing kind of music for Community, and through Community started doing a lot of work with Donald Glover. Like I remember I remember going to a concert after Camp came out, back before Donald Glover really, or Childish Gambino really like blew up like crazy, and loving that album. And so it's been cool getting to see kind of Ludwig's name pop up here and there. I certainly saw him most notably in Black Panther prior to this, but then when his name popped up on the credits for The Mandalorian, I was like, oh, that's really cool too. Yes, awesome. He's also obviously with Black Panther. He's one of the things I didn't know that this show introduces the idea of is Ludwig was roommates with Ryan Coogler at USC, and so they've been collaborating on all of Ryan Coogler's stuff: Fruitvale Station, Creed, and then Black Panther, obviously. So really cool, kind of seeing that. And then they also talk about the connection between Jon Favreau and Donald Glover, having worked on The Lion King. So they have a lot of cool little stories there, and I just love the way we get to, this is the first time I really get to see how he works, and the idea that he read the scripts and then just kind of went off and did his own thing, and like he kind of goes through the opening of this episode is really him going through his kind of creative process, coming up with the theme for The Mandalorian. He wanted to pick up some recorders because it was an instrument he hadn't really explored a lot, and he kind of plays with some of them. He kind of plays that like theme that is so iconically Mandalorian now, and then he kind of like moves from instrument to instrument. And this is one of the things that like it always like blows my mind about composers, is their ability to play so many different instruments. As somebody who, like, I played percussion, and as a percussionist I played more instruments certainly than a lot of other people in the band or orchestra when I was in high school, because I would go from snare to bass to a drum kit to a marimba to a xylophone to bells to chimes to a timpani, and I kind of had to know all of those different elements to help kind of fill in whatever role was needed for each given kind of song in those days. But I played, prior to that, I played recorder for I don't know, a quarter basically in fourth grade, because in my music program, my music upbringing was in fourth grade. Everybody who wanted to play in band or orchestra, that was when you got to pick. You got to pick, I wanted to be in band or I wanted to be in orchestra. If you wanted to be in band, the first 9 weeks you basically learned how to play the recorder, and you play hot cross buns and stuff, and that was kind of your training to a wind instrument. And then from there, you would go on to a woodwind or a brass instrument if you were in band. And I actually wasn't able to go and play percussion because they were afraid everybody just wanted to come in and be a drummer. And so you weren't actually able to play percussion until you were in fifth grade, when I was growing up. They changed it like a few years later. I remember being like mildly annoyed by that, but I appreciated that I had to play clarinet for a year basically, because it taught me how to read and learn music and stuff like that. And then that became very instrumental in pardon the pun, in playing music throughout kind of my elementary, middle school, and high school career. And there's another element of this that is all taking you back, because one of the aspects of this is they very much kind of show in this episode Ludwig going from kind of like he came up with a lot of these songs together and kind of, or like on his own really, and kind of like built them out, and then he takes it and as a composer he kind of like expands it out and figures out a way to do it with an 80-person orchestra. And you see a lot of stuff from kind of the recording studios there, And I don't know if it was the same recording studios I went to, but I remember in middle school specifically, because I was one of the drummers that crossed over between band and orchestra to help the orchestra out with concerts and stuff. I ended up getting to go to Disneyland for that field trip in 8th grade, and we got to perform at Disneyland as well as perform in the recording studios backstage at Disneyland. So on the Disney lot, we got to go in and as part of the, I'm sure it was like a thing that tons of school programs did, because we got a shirt and everything for it, I think. And I remember getting to be playing in a Disney kind of not concert and rehearsal hall and performance recording studio, basically. It was just really surreal getting to experience that as a kid, and then seeing that kind of in this is kind of flooding all those memories back. And it was really cool getting to see that and think about that and think back on all those times from when I was growing up. But yeah, the fact that Ludwig goes from playing a recorder to playing the piano to playing drum, or recorded drum to piano to guitar, I think, all within the span of the first minute or two of this episode. It's okay, yeah, that's really cool. He can fluidly do that and play around with all that stuff. He's just he's a very cool, great musician. I love getting to see. I love feeling a sense of pride from supporting him back during his community days, now that he's blowing up and doing these crazy big billion-dollar movies like Black Panther and stuff, and doing something like Star Wars: The Mandalorian. Really cool. And I love the conversations that they have in that episode, talking about how he has a huge reverence for John Williams, and that was how he got into music, really. And John Williams' music and scores helped get him to looking at classical music. It's something that I'm getting an even better appreciation of now that I work at a symphony, where they've done multiple concerts based solely off of John Williams' music. Getting to see kind of it's something I've thought for a long time, that in 300 years, the music that gets played as classical music, that we look at Beethoven and Mozart and stuff like that now, in 200 or 300 years, that'll be people like John Williams. It'll be people like Nobuo Uematsu from the game side of things and the Final Fantasy games and stuff. Games and movies are the orchestral classical music that will exist in 100 years time or something like that. And it's a really cool thing. I mean, to a degree that already exists. Film music is already, we played the Harry Potter theme when I was in marching band in high school, and stuff like that. So getting to see kind of Ludwig take that love of Star Wars growing up that got him into music, and getting to kind of add now his own flavor to it. And they talk about how, he wasn't being confined, and it was go experiment, do something that's not, what we think of as Star Wars. It's really cool. And so I love just getting to hear them discuss kind of that whole process. Really cool stuff in the score episode there. And again, it was, of this series in particular, it was the most interesting because it broke the format of what we'd seen elsewhere. A lot of it is, just the documentary crew looking at and discussing with Ludwig on his stuff, and then instead of a table with 4 or 5 or 6 people around it, it was just the 3 of them, of Ludwig, Jon Favreau, and Dave Filoni, sitting there and talking about Star Wars and a lot of that stuff. So really cool seeing all that episode stuff come together. And then in the Connections episode, some of the stories that they delve into, I love that it was we are Star Wars fans, and we're going to put a whole bunch of stuff in here that are super deep cuts for Star Wars fans. And, if you get the reference, awesome. If you don't, it's not going to take away from your experience with the thing. The first one they talk about is, they talk about this character that I knew nothing about prior to watching this. They talk about this character, Wilro Hood, who is seen trying to flee Cloud City, and he had an ice cream maker. And I remember seeing when the first couple episodes of Mandalorian came out, I remember seeing stories about like the ice cream maker being an Easter egg, but I didn't know what that was in reference to at all. And they talk about here that at Celebration, Star Wars Celebration, there are cosplayers dedicated to being Wilro Hood, who is just clearly a background extra creature or like character in Empire Strikes Back, with this random prop that he was given to run off with that was just an ice cream maker. And they talk about the running of Wilro Hood as kind of a regular occurrence that happens at Star Wars Celebration, and the cosplayers that try and be that character because there are so many, that ice cream maker from the 70s or whatever has become like a very hard commodity to find. And so just a cool little story that the thing they use for the Mandalorian's payment in this, they kind of built and framed off of that ice cream maker prop, that original prop from Empire Strikes Back. As I said, they talk about a lot of kind of let's the idea behind Mandalorian being, let's take the most obscure and the most mundane characters from the Star Wars universe and make them the focus, make them front and center. Let's take Ugnaughts and kind of, as Jon Favreau says, like, we took an Ugnaught and we kind of made him our Yoda character kind of thing. Or they take the Korrans as like squid face people, and they take the Blurgs from the Ewok movie. Jon Favreau very excitedly took like the gun that the Mandalorian uses from the holiday special that George Lucas kind of like disowns and hates. And they have some fun stuff about that. I love that I didn't know this until seeing this, but I probably saw it like making the rounds a little bit on Twitter last week or something. But the idea that Mark Hamill did a cameo as the robot in the Mos Eisley Cantina scene in episode 5, I think, of The Mandalorian. Like, he's the one voicing that droid bartender, and that's really, that, like, there was already a fun evolution of, this is a place where droids used to not be allowed, and now they're, kind of running the show. Was kind of an in-world creative evolution of the area and the environment, and just hearing that, like, oh, and also that's Mark Hamill doing the voice of it was a cool little nod that they got him to come in and do that. And then something I certainly wouldn't have caught, but I love, they talk about the idea of R5D4, who's the little red droid that R2D2 kind of sabotages at the beginning of A New Hope. They talk about him being there in the cantina in the background as if this droid never made it off Tatooine. He kind of got sabotaged there by R2D2, and here all these years later is still hanging out there on Tatooine in the Mos Eisley Cantina. The fact that they kind of like took that droid that they already had on set for something else and kind of repainted him to make him specifically R5D4 was just another, super deep cut nod to them. I personally got very, choked up and emotional at the idea. One of the big stories that had come out of the last couple episodes was that they brought in a lot of the 501st, which is the stormtroopers group of cosplayers that go out there. They make their own stormtrooper outfits. They go out and do charity events. I've seen them a ton of times when I've gone to Star Wars things at places like the Alamo Drafthouse or stuff like that. There are, segments of the 501st everywhere. I've got friends that I used to do theater with that I believe are in the 501st. And it was very cool that when the people behind The Mandalorian were like, we want to get like a bunch of stormtroopers for this scene, but we only have like the budget and the costuming budget for like 30. Can we find more? And they put out a call, and a whole bunch of fans that did this showed up, not knowing what they were showing up for, but they show up and they get to be a part of Star Wars now. They are in Star Wars history now as members of kind of the crew there in The Mandalorian, and getting to see the passion with which they talk about what they do and how they make their costumes and how excited they were to be there on set, getting to see so many of them kind of talk, and the fact that they all have call signs and kind of recognize all that stuff was just a very joyous, like, those are the kinds of fans I love seeing in the Star Wars world, in the Star Wars universe. Not the people that are out there screaming about Last Jedi was bad or Rise of Skywalker was bad for X, Y, and Z. It was like, these are the people who are so dedicated to this. They've found this hobby, they've found this passion, they've made friends through this whole thing. Being they talk about a group of the 500 first came down from San Francisco to see their friends in the SoCal segment. Just really cool seeing them get to be supported in this sense. And then lastly, they talk about kind of the X-Wing pilot cameos in episode 6, and that be those cameos being Dave Filoni, Deborah Chow, and Rick Famuyiwa, all the 3 of the directors from season 1. So I think Bryce Dallas Howard then ends up being like the only one who just directed. I don't think she has an acting thing in the series or any kind of cameo or stuff, because obviously Taika Waititi also does IG-11, and Jon Favreau voiced one of the Mandalorians that came in as well. So I think Bryce Dallas Howard is the only one that did not have like an extra little thing. But they talk about how Dave Filoni kind of really talks about how like he didn't want to do it. He was dreading it. But it was something that John really had as an idea, and Dave Filoni talks about how like in doing that, especially as somebody coming new to the world of live action acting, it gave him a new appreciation for what the actors go through on set, and they talk about kind of the vulnerability of getting into costume and then walking to set, and how silly that might all feel and all that kind of stuff, and you've got all these people sitting around waiting for you on the production side of things. So he very much kind of used it as a learning experience, even though he didn't really want to do it. Really cool stuff. I love stories like that coming out of this show, because again, I really enjoyed The Mandalorian. I look forward to eventually maybe doing an episode on the actual show The Mandalorian, but diving into all these kind of behind the scenes stories over the last 3 parts of that D Plus series, talking about these 8 episodes has been really cool and really fun. So definitely check it out. Again, Report Card, I give this one an A. Really enjoyed all the kind of the ins and outs, especially again, as somebody who's been a fan of Ludwig Göransson since Community stuff, getting to see him go out there and make moves, making a Star Wars, just really cool stuff. Extra credit if you like this series. Of course, you have The Mandalorian out there, you have Empire of Dreams, Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker, The Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, and A New Hope, as well as really anything else Star Wars in Disney Plus. I haven't watched anything else on Disney Plus, so no other extracurriculars for me this week. I know Cameron, because I floated the idea of sitting down and recording with him. He sat down and watched Avengers Endgame. I know Avengers Infinity War is now available on Disney Plus, so maybe we'll eventually sit down and do episodes dedicated to those films as well. But that is going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you again for joining me. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey on Twitter. You can follow everything that's going on with That Nerdy Site at thatnerdysite.com. If you'd like to be a part of the show, you can go to thatnerdysite.com/D+guest and let us know what Disney Plus offering you would like to come on and chat about, or just tweet me. It's probably the quickest and easiest way to bring it to my attention what you want to sit down and talk about. And then, don't let up on tweeting me about it and talking to me about it, because I haven't been great about reaching out to people. One of the things I will kind of throw in here at the end that I mentioned on this week's That Nerdy Site show is, with all the shakeups on our site recently, some of our programming might change in the near future, in the short term. It might not, but I just kind of put it out there that like a show like this might move to an every other week kind of format for the time being, if trying to continually produce all the shows we're doing just becomes a little too overwhelming for our minimized team at this point. No firm changes in the schedule, and I'll certainly kind of put it out there and mention it on this show if we ever actually end up doing that and kind of moving to that. I'll try and give some advanced warning and advanced notice, but just putting it out there that it may be in the cards here in the near future. We will see. If you liked what you heard, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. And if you do feel so inclined, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Thank you again for joining me. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other, and class dismissed.